Hello, I'm Sophie Woolley. I'm a white woman with natural strawberry blonde bobbed hair. I'm middle-aged. I'm wearing a greeny blue dress and silk scarf, and I'm sitting in a plain walled room, and there was a plant behind me. I'm a writer and a performer. I began as a poet, a satirist, a short story writer and a performance artist, and I crossed over into making theatre and writing and acting for TV and radio. Being a performer is how I first became visible and known professionally as a writer. Becoming a successful writer-performer happened at the same time as I went progressively deaf. As well as a dual role as an artist, I have a dual deaf and hearing identity. Deafness goes back generations in my family. I'm going to talk about my own arts world visibility and deafness and the politics of that in the context of my autobiographical solo show Augmented, and also in my previous work before I wrote anything about deaf identity or deafness. My stage show Augmented toured in 2020, and the film of the show streamed at 3 festivals in the lockdowns, and it's the only play I've written for myself to perform in which I draw directly on my personal deaf experience, and it's about my journey as a writer performer as I went deaf. And it's a solo show in which I play myself, my mum, my partner, and my cochlear implant surgeon. And it's based on my experience of what I call becoming a deaf cyborg. In 2013, my life was radically altered very swiftly when I got a cochlear implant. Why did I write a show about it? I'll be blunt, I was so stunned at what an implant was really like, how it was not the joyless metallic drudgery that I'd expected, and that it made me realise that I'd been really ignorant about cochlear implants in the past. And I felt like a lot of what is written about them and shown in culture about implants is quite shallow and underinformed. And also, deaf people are the original influencers when it comes to technology. So what we use today, hearing people will be using in future. And so I wanted to say, hearing people are going to get computer implants in future. But I was worried that no one would believe me when I said this, hearing or deaf. And the idea to people is monstrous. Implanting microchips in your skull is viewed as monstrous, or like something out of a conspiracy theory or something. But I'm not a monster though. I'm pretty sure I'm not a monster. In future, I believe that hearing people will be implanting chips. It seems like sci-fi now, but my experience of my body and my mind collaborating with technology inside me is pure joy. That implantation hasn't made my deaf identity disappear. It's still there. I'm still deaf, I can hear, but I'm also still totally deaf. I still sign with my mum and family as I show in the play. But there was a tension in writing Augmented. I feared that the power of my message might pose a threat or cause traumatic harm to oppressed groups such as deaf people and disabled people. I had that fear when I was writing the show. I felt like I couldn't just write my new cyborg culture from within itself. So at first, I tried to find a new language to write about my own experience in a way that didn't oppress other deaf people. I self-edited a lot of truth of what I really wanted to say. And then I realized that the language that I used inside my head about my implant, the secret language I used to myself, that I felt ashamed about, was beautiful and sci-fi in style. It was forbidden, alienating, esoteric, techie, or evangelical even. My inner switched on cyborg voice reminded me of misguided characters in dystopian novels. The irony of me suddenly worshipping sound as a transcendental redemption after being fed up with sound, like just seeing it as horrible noise for years from my hearing aids, it made me laugh. And it was also disturbing It was naughty. It was my voice. And with my creative team, people like Josh Pharaoh and Rachel Bagshaw, Adrian Courtley, I made the sound journey visible through the captions design, the design of the show by Khadija Raza and Laura Hopkins, the direction, the sound score. And it's a complex story told simply. If you're going to make your disability visual, if you're going to make your disability visible, you have to be clear, but you don't want to oversimplify the truth or dilute your language. The tour was stopped halfway through the pandemic, and I'm currently developing the playtext of this production to submit it to publishers. In years to come, it will stand as a piece of prescient writing about the future of humanity, the impact of this new technology on our relationships with the world and the people around us. It's also a piece of deaf writing. I had to write about going deaf in the show because I can't talk about going hearing, becoming a cyborg without going deaf, talking about that. Before Augmented, I had not wanted to write about going deaf. And this is because I instinctively knew the risk of becoming pigeonholed and sidelined. Because although I'm proud of my deaf identity, deafness is not the most interesting thing about me, nor is being a cyborg. Even as I went deaf, when I was first writing professionally, I wrote outside my deafness. I wrote and performed on a wide range of topics before Augmented. My first big artistic endeavor was called DJ Bird. It was about a DJ's girlfriend at the heart of music, disco, and hearing culture. And this character, DJ Bird, allowed me to be very visible, larger than life, on stage, in nightclubs, in the press, in the literary world, and I had a satirical spoof diary column for a year. And I also wrote a play about women who run, which was a murder story and a satire about running. And I wrote a sitcom for Radio 4 about the environment and climate change, climate activism. And I wrote a children's play for theatre about bees as well. And gradually, as I went deaf, I had more deaf-related material and a better command of the material. Early in that phase, I wrote a web series called Deaf Faker, in which I play a hearing person trying to learn about deaf culture and fake being deaf. And when Deaf Faker was first put up on YouTube, people who don't know me or my work complained in the comments that I was being rude about deaf people. They didn't realise it was satire. And fans were explaining to them, no, Sophie's deaf. She's deaf herself. It's a joke. And I was delighted. Becoming a performer as well as a writer, it gave me power, visibility, and confidence at work that I might have lost as I became more deaf. But in touring a show about my deafness in March 2020, have I pigeonholed myself to only being thought of and remembered when someone needs a deaf person to work on their project? Maybe. But as a busy writer performer, I try not to dwell on it. But what might happen next is people stop calling me when they need to book a deaf person, but book me instead when they need to book a genuine cyborg from the future. And that's fine too. Deafness and cyborg identity is so misunderstood that I'm excited to do what I can to make it more visible in a more complex way in culture.